Okay, I'm now here at my sewing machine. I have my pin together top here. I have a little piece of scrap here. And this is my vintage Durkop sewing machine. It's a semi-professional sewing machine. I love it. I love vintage sewing machines. And this is what I use. So you ladies who don't have an overlocker and want to make t-shirts and sweatshirts and leggings for your grandchildren and for your children and for your nephews and nieces or for yourself, you can do it on an ordinary machine. The machines of this day and age are a little more modern than this, and you'll have maybe 4 or 5 different stitches you can choose from. On this machine, I'm going to check on my piece of scrap first if I want to use a zigzag or the triple stitch zigzag. They're the two I have on this machine, and they're the ones I favour personally for stitching the t-shirt fabrics for. And I'll show you where. So I'm going to first of all do a zigzag. When you're using a zigzag for stitching close together, you need to be reasonably close, but not really tight like a buttonhole. But you don't want it very far apart, although that can give really nice effects on the cuffs, which I'll show you when we get there. Or if you look at my cuff video, you'll see it falls lovely, really nice. But anyway, so I'm going to use I'm going to try it on a 2 and see. That might be more like a 2.5 on your machine, but I've put it on a 2 on a straightforward zigzag on my full width 4mm zigzag stitch. And I'm going to see if I think that's close enough and how it's going to stitch on here. And it's on the wrong one, so let me alter it. There we go. I might want it a little bit closer than that, so that to me would be a 1.5. No, go back, and I'll show you why in a moment. So I'm going to just run that off, and I have a stretch needle on my sewing machine. I'm using a stretch needle here, not a universal. I am using a stretch. It works much better. Now on my bit of fabric, you can see I started with the wrong stitch. And then I went on to a zigzag at about a 2, I believe I said this was on my machine. And I wasn't sure, so I made it a little closer on a 1.5 on here. Now this isn't pressed, remember, if I hang it, you can see there's virtually no pulling here on the 2. But when I go onto the 1.5, the fabric has started to stretch a little bit. So that tells me that's too close. I need a 2 or just over a 2 if I'm going to use the zigzag. Now I'm going to run along on the triple stitch zigzag. I'll just change it. And I always do this on every different fabric because I have a vintage machine and it can be a little bit like me at times and go a bit odd. But I like to check that I've got the right needle in, because who can remember which needle you left in your machine? I can't. That I've got the right needle in, that the thread is happy with the thread I'm using, because sometimes it doesn't like the thread you're using, and that it's right on the fabric. Before I put my fabric down, which costs me a lot of money, that's too far apart, and I'm not sure I can alter that. It costs me a lot of money, and I don't want to ruin the garment I've just cut out. So, that's not too close, I think. Oh no. Okay, I'm going to show you this. Scissors. So again, I'm looking for how it stitches on the fabric. Now, it's done this great open stitch here on a number 2, which is a bit mad, really. You can see it's a triple stitch. It's really nice, but I think it's too wide. So when you look at your seam, can you see? That's each point. So it's too far away. So down here, I've made it quite a lot narrower It's still the triple stitch, and it's not stretched the fabric either. Okay, and I'm going to have a look, and when you stretch the seam there, it's much more like an ordinary seam. Can you see? It's much more closer. Nobody's really going to look at this bit, but this gives it strength, okay? And it also means, because I've used a zigzag, I can stretch this. Look, you can stretch it and it's not going to poing. Now I can tell you, if I stretch it, it might poing. If I stretch it very hard. There we go, I've heard one go. But that was on the triple stitch. And the whole point of the triple stitch is it sort of locks itself in. It's much sturdier. But if you need a lot of stretch, the standard zigzag is not breaking. Look. Whereas that triple stitch, which is a much sturdier stitch, is doing. Okay, so I think for this I'm going to just use the standard zigzag on about a 2. I'm happy with that. It's for a little man. He's only 2 years old. I can assure you he's never going to look at the seams that I've sewn on his t-shirt. He won't mind that they're zigzag. All he cares about is he's going to get a t-shirt that's got diggers on. How fantastic's that? So, I'm going to sew my seams now, and the only reason you're still there is because I want you ladies who don't have the overlocker or a cover stitch machine to know you can do this and it'll be fine. It really will. Now, as you can see, I'm very naughty. I don't pin it. I've made this t-shirt quite a few times. I also know that the pattern pieces fit together. Sometimes when you cut pattern pieces, they don't fit. I also know how to ease. So you ladies that are only just starting your sewing, okay, pin this. Pop a pin in. In fact, I'll put one at the end. Put 1 or 2 or 3 pins in to hold your seams together, because I'm teaching you really bad ways. But when you've been sewing for 30 or 40 years, you'll have bad ways too, but they work out fine. But you can see that these edges really fit quite well together. There's no need to stretch them. They are the right length because this is a very good pattern. I also haven't looked to see what my seam allowance is. I'm pretty sure it's something like, I don't know, 1/4 inch, 5/8, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I'm only going to use the width of my foot, because I know I've made this pattern before. I know it fits him. I know it works fine. And most of these patterns do check the seam allowance. I don't know where it is, or I would check for you, but do check your seam allowance. If it's 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, then you do need to have a seam guide here and stitched 1.5 centimetres in. I'm pretty sure this isn't. I'm pretty sure this is 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to use the edge of my foot here, let me show you, as my sewing guide. So I am going to run the edge of my 2 fabrics along the edge of my foot. Okay, that gives me just over 1/4 inch on this machine. I've measured it. It's neither here nor there. If you have a bit more or a bit less on your toddler's clothes, if you're making a beautiful Gertrude 1950s fitted dress for yourself, it really does matter if you go 1/4 inch one way or the other, because it either is too big on you or it's too small on you. So on the little ones, 1/4 inch, thereabouts, that will work. So I'm going to pop this back onto the zigzag. I'm going to put it back to the 2. I quite liked it, just over 2. And I'm just going to hold my ends to start. And I'm going to zigzag this seam, ladies, using the edge of my foot as a guide. I'm going quite slow. You can go faster if you want to, but that foot on the floor, you don't have to put it all the way down and go fast and go, oh God, I can't control it. You don't have to. You can go quite slow. Press it gently, it goes quite slow. And then you have time to feed it through nicely. Now, you ladies that are done this a lot more than me will do it quicker than me. But I'm just going to put my finger on my two ends here so they don't run away. And I'm just going to follow that curve around. You note my finger stays at the end of the foot, so I can't get it under the needle. And I run my fabric out. Okay? I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to snip it off. You may notice I haven't reversed on this. Okay, there's a little stretch because we're going around the corner, but that will press back. When I press this seam, that will shrink back and you won't see that. So I haven't reversed at the top or the bottom of these seams because I'm going to do something else here. And that will then fasten in the stitch. Okay, so that's my zigzag. I'm going to do the rest and I'll come back to you then. Now, I've come back to you to do this last seam, and believe me, there's nothing worse than watching somebody sew on a video. I always run it on. But I've come back to you for a reason, which is, I do realise that not everyone's falls as well as mine. And as you can see, I'm popping these back together by hand, measuring them up. And one of the things that, a tip if you like, when you're sewing the stretch fabric, let the machine feed it through. Try and have a flat surface. The one thing I did realise, you know, for some people, they get really like wavy seams or something doesn't fit. And that's because you're so tense when you're sewing. You're pulling and stretching at it. Now, when you cut your fabric, part of this will be on what's called the bias, and it's the stretchiest bit. It's great if you want to do decorative edges like a lettuce edge, but we don't. So when you put your two edges together, nice and gently, just use two fingers lightly to keep that in place, okay? And let the machine take it at its own pace. Don't push it, don't pull it. There is only one time you would pull your fabric, okay? I'm hoping I'm going to get that on this sleeve. I probably won't. Right, I have a little tiny bit, and that is if you're getting near the end and you can see there's a difference here. There isn't on mine, but I'm going to make it so there is. This is stretch fabric, and we can do what's called easing. You can do this on woven fabrics, but it's not as easy. But on stretch fabrics, it's really easy. So the important thing is to keep these end pieces together as you want them to stitch together, okay? And I'm going to put that down, and then I'm going to work with my fingers back to make sure this is flat. Now, if one piece is not flat, you need to ease that piece in. So you would hold back a little bit, not like a hand of stone. Hold back a little bit just to stretch the two fabrics over quite a long way, so that you don't get a little nipping or a little tuck. Just to gently stretch that in and let the machine take it through on the stretch. And once you've got past it, stop the stretch and just let the machine take it through. That's called ease. And it's a little trick that once you know how to do it, it's brilliant. Please also notice I cut my threads when I've stitched them. So every time I do a seam, I cut my threads off. I know this is really annoying, but in the long run, it will save you bags of time. Going around it, trying to find the threads you've not cut off, you miss them, you go to sew it, you have to stop and cut. Oh, it's a nightmare. Cut them off as you do it. If you learn to do this when you learn to sew, this will stay with you forever, like it has with me. Okay, now to pressing.